Hi everybody, in this video we're going to talk about solving quadratics using square roots, and at the end of the video I want us to be able to use this method to solve and then write our solution as a point. Okay, so let's talk about what we've done before. We've talked about how to solve quadratics with three terms. So we talked about factoring, we will eventually talk about the quadratic formula. But when we only have two terms and we have the x squared term and then we have the constant or just a number, we can use this method of square roots, and it's really nice because it's pretty quick, but it only works when you do not have that middle b value. So notice here we have an x squared and we have a constant. That's the only time that we can use this method. And when we're using this method, we are going to use the idea of inverses. So inverse operations undo each other. So if we look to this chart on the right, addition and subtraction are kind of opposites, if you will, so they undo each other. So is multiplication and division. And so now that we're talking about quadratics, it always has that x squared term. The opposite or inverse of x squared is the square root. So whenever we are trying to cancel out or get rid of an x squared, we're going to take the square root so that they cancel out, because the square root of x squared is equal to x. Okay, so let's talk about how to solve this. So first step is I need to identify if I can use this method. I'm like, oh, look, I have the x squared term. I don't have that middle x term, and I just have a number. Cool, I can go ahead and use this method. Step one is to isolate x squared. Just get it by itself. So I noticed that this minus 24 is on the same side. Add it to both sides and move it over. This 2 is in front. I want to get x squared completely by itself, so I'm going to divide each side by 2, and I get x squared is equal to 12. Okay, there's step one. Step two is I need to cancel out this x squared, so I'm like, hey, I can do the inverse operation and take the square root of each side. The square root and squared are going to cancel to leave me with x. And now on the right side, whenever you take a square root, this is so important. You have to put plus or minus every single time. So it is equal to plus or minus the square root of 12. So just be sure that you put that there every time. Okay, next we're going to try and simplify the radical if possible. So I'm going to look at 12. I'm going to do the factor tree, break it down. I have a group of 2s, a 3 left over, so that guy has to stay on the inside. So I have x is equal to plus or minus 2 square root 3. And now technically we have two different answers. We have positive 2 square root 3 and negative 2 square root 3. And if they ever ask you to write it as a point, we can break it up into 2 points and put the negative and the positive. Okay, so that's one example. I want to show us one more before we go. So notice this one looks a little bit different, but again, we have an x squared term. It's okay that there's another number inside, and then we just have the constant. So same thing, we need to isolate our x squared term first. So we want to move 18 to the other side by adding it. Then here, because everything is inside the parentheses, I'm just going to say, hey, let's get rid of the square root right now. I'm going to take the square root of each side. The left side there going to cancel, so I'm left with only x minus 2. The right side, again, remember, put that plus or minus every single time. We're going to see if we can simplify the square root of 18. I can take out a pair of 3s and leave a pair of 2. So I have x minus 2 is equal to plus or minus 3 square root 2. But here's where it's different, y'all. We don't want x minus 2. We just want x. So I'm like, hey, how could I get x completely by itself? Well, I'm just going to add 2 to both sides. And when you add it to another radical, you cannot combine a number and a number with a radical. So just leave them as is. And again, technically, because we have a plus and a minus, I'm like, hey, I have two answers. I have 2 plus 3 square root 2 and 2 minus square root 2. So those are my two solutions for the x value. Again, if they ever ask you to write it as a point, just put comma 0 in parentheses and you can write those two as points. Alrighty, there is your overview of solving square roots. If y'all have questions, come find me. If not, I'll see y'all in the next one.